Third Canticle. Our Creator ascertained that the Holy Son Absolute, on which he dwelt with his cherubim and seraphim, was gradually diminishing in volume from the flow of time itself. Gurdjieff's creation story deciphered, shown in 2 three-body enneagrams. Before launching into the metaphysics of Gurdjieff's unique version of creation, the most important contribution contained in this last half of this essay is the deciphering of the strange anomalies. Explanation for the shortening and lengthening of 2 Stopinders. Because if Stopinders are notes, then shortening or lengthening cannot affect the note, only the timing of the note. If Stopinders are the spaces between notes, then shortening and lengthening is illogical. All civilizations have a creation story to understand how they began. The hope is that this understanding will give a purpose to life, especially since life seems to vary from good to bad, from pain to ecstasy, from heaven to hell. The Judeo-Christian version contains 2 creations. God promises that the first creation was good. In Gurdjieff's creation, this would be an affirmation that the law of Triamazikanmo, the law of 3, and the law of Heptaparapashanak, the law of 7, were fully functioning as auto-egocrat. The law of 7 resembles the 7 days of the Judeo-Christian creation, showing that the law of 7 is a universal law. The law of 3 is in Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Immediately following the first Judeo-Christian creation, God proceeds to create mankind over again, with Adam and Eve from dust, and by tempting them to eat a forbidden fruit that contains the knowledge of good and evil, expels them from paradise. This brings to thought the question of whether paradise ever existed until we were thrown out. In Gurdjieff's creation story, his endlessness, God, is existing with his cherubim and seraphim in a place called the Holy Son Absolute, realizing that his domain will eventually disappear from the erosion of time itself. The solution of his endlessness is to modify the sacred law of 7 that exists inside the sacred law of 3, in order to create the whole universe, to replenish his domain. This clever metaphor falls apart because it is time that confirms our existence. If one could forever sit still silently, time would appear to stand still, and in that moment there would be no thought, no feeling, no hunger. It would be paradise, or as Buddha would say, nirvana. Yet our existence is subject to time. If there were no time, then we or God would not exist. In the scientific creation story, there is the concept of the Big Bang that is derived from our observation of galaxies moving out from an infinitesimal point into infinity. We may try to explain this with mathematics, thermodynamics, and physics, but the truth is that before the Big Bang, there was no Big Bang. Something cannot arise from nothing unless something is already present. Matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. All creation stories have as their basis the belief that total perfection once existed. Yet we must face the truth that if this total perfection was left uncreated, then we or God would not exist. All of creation requires a change to the principles on which perfection existed. If it were possible for these changes to be reversed by everything and everyone, then this perfection would eliminate the chance of anyone achieving perfection. But if a few of us work towards perfection, then it can be obtained. Thus there will always be good and evil. All life is pain. And this can be the salvation of the few. Holy Planet Purgatory, Chapter 39, page 748 to 750. In the beginning, when nothing yet existed, and when the whole of our universe was empty, endless space, with the presence of only the prime source cosmic substance, ether or krillno, our present great and most holy Son Absolute existed alone in all this empty space. And it was on this then sole cosmic concentration, our uni-being Absolute existed alone in all this empty space. And it was on this then sole cosmic concentration that our uni-being Creator, with his cherubim and seraphim, had the place of his most glorious being. From the third most sacred canticle of our cherubim and seraphim, we are worthy of learning that our Creator omnipotent once ascertained on this same Son Absolute, on which he dwelled, with his cherubim and seraphim, was, although almost imperceptibly, yet nevertheless gradually diminishing in volume. Through this review, our omnipotent Creator, for the first time, made it clear that the cause of this gradual diminishing of the volume of the Son Absolute was merely the herapas, that is, the flow of time itself. Thereupon our endlessness became thoughtful, for in his divine deliberations he became clearly aware that if this herapas should so continue to diminish the volume of the Son Absolute, then sooner or later it would ultimately bring about the complete destruction of this sole place of his being. It is just then that our Creator, all-maintainer, was forced to create the present existing megalocosmos, i.e., our world. And so in the beginning, our most holy Son Absolute was maintained by the help of these two primordial sacred laws, the sacred Heptaparapashanak, the sacred Triamazikamno. But then these primordial laws functioned independently, without the help of any forces whatsoever coming from outside, and this system was still called only the auto-egocrat. And here is a diagram of auto-egocrat, showing body, spirit, and soul, circles, and triangles. The middle one is body, the second one is spirit, and the outer one is soul. The above figure, first introduced in my talk, All and Everything about Gurdjieff's Stopinders, was derived from the Enneagram circle, with the musical interval proportions mapped with a protractor, using the formula interval times 360 minus 360. All 12 musical intervals were mapped for each of the three bodies, body, spirit, and soul. Note that Fa is exactly on the right point of the inner triangle, and La is exactly on the left point, with soul at the base of the triangle, exactly opposite the top of the triangle at Do. The octave of body begins at 0, the octave of spirit begins at Fa, and the octave at soul begins at La. What is significant is that there are no points of action. Everything is complete and perfect. There is no universe, and actually no endlessness to observe it, and thus there is really no erosion of time. This auto-egocrat octave does not sound, and no one hears it. Thus this endlessness had to have already created the universe with imperfection in order for it to exist. Explanation for the shortening and lengthening of two Stopinders. Holy Planet Purgatory 39, page 753. Our common Father, Omni-Being Endlessness, having decided to change the principle of the functioning of the existence of the then still unique cosmic concentration and sole place of his most glorious being, first of all altered the process itself of the functioning of these two primordial fundamental sacred laws, and actualized a greater change in the law of the sacred Heptaparapashanak. These changes in the functioning of the sacred Heptaparapashanak consisted in this, that in three of the Stopinders he altered the what is called subjective actions which had been until then in the Stopinders, in this respect, that 1. He lengthened the stopinder between the third and fourth deflection, that's mi fa, the mechano-coinciding midline, for the purpose of providing the requisite inherency for receiving for its functioning the automatic affluence of all forces which were near. 2. He shortened the stopinder between the last deflection and the beginning of the new cycle, that's ti do, the intentionally actualized midline, to facilitate the commencement of a new cycle of its completing process. 3. In a third, disharmonized the subjective functioning of the stopinder that is fifth in general successiveness, so la. Its disharmony flowed by itself from the change in the two aforementioned stopinders. As regards the third stopinder, he changed it in its subjective action, which is fifth in general successiveness and is called hanal ut. Its disharmony flowed by itself from the change of the two aforementioned stopinders. This third stopinder would determine the outcome of the completed process. The explanation for this lengthening and shortening of the two stopinders can be shown by comparing the first diagram titled Endlessness Auto-Egocrat, and you can see how the protractor was used to find the positions based on the interval fractions, which gives no gaps available for forces to enter in. To the second diagram labeled Endlessness Altered Stopinders, which is the usual one shown by Gurdjieff to Uspensky, which allows for two gaps. To create this usual diagram from the diagram of auto-egocrat, the right part must be lengthened as described in number 1, so that far as below the triangle opening at mi fa, and the left part of the circle must be shortened as described in number 2 to allow position la to be above the inner triangle. This opens a space at so la as described in 3. These two places are the primary points where forces can be entered into the enneagram to create the spirit and soul. So this second figure, when filled out below and titled The Three-Body Enneagram, is discussed in detail in my essays Three-Body Enneagram and Photonic Soul. And there it is. In the inner blue triangle of the body, its right-hand point is where the breath enters in, and also becomes the starting do of the spirit octave, and its left-hand point represents the senses that become the starting point of the soul octave. So having made these changes, creation proceeds using the action of the sacred Triyamazikamno. Let us thank God for creating this imperfect world, because it is precisely these imperfections that will allow each of us the chance to join God in heaven. You may pretend that the world is full of joy, but if you take off your rose-colored glasses and accept the pain, you will find your salvation in God. Hope to see you there with all the souls who struggled their whole lives. Listen to my song, Timeless Food.